Hey everyone, my name is Prince and welcome back to another video talking about Max Steel. It's been a while since we've talked about Max Steel, and don't worry, the Season 5 Part 2 video is still coming, I just haven't finished it yet. But if you guys don't want to miss any teasers for that video, then you best go down into the description down below and join both the Casual Discord and the Max Steel Unofficial Discord. The Casual Discord is my central YouTube Discord, which I use to notify you guys whenever I upload videos, go live, and give you guys teasers for future projects. And of course, the Max Steel Discord is a Discord dedicated for all you Max Steel fans to come along and chat with one another. But in the meantime, we're back talking about more of Max's enemies, and in this video, we're talking about the Elementors. The Elementors are some of the coolest villains in the entire show. Powerful Ultralinks that have bonded with the elements, whether they're going it solo or combining together, they've always given Max a hard time. So basically in this video we're just going to be going over every one of the individual Elementors as well as all of the fusions seen throughout Max Steel. So make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and go join the Discords down in the description down below, and without further ado, let's get into it. So the first of the Elementors that we see in Max Steel is actually in the very first episode of the show. In Come Together Part 1, we encounter Fire Elementor, who was sent by Dread to investigate the mysterious turbo energy signature.
It wasn't me.
It was me.
Now, out of the 5 individual Elementors, Fire Elementor isn't the smartest of the group, but he's by no means the dumbest either. He's very hot-headed, pun intended, and is probably the most psychopathic of the group. But Fire Elementor, of course, is in control of fire, which you would have thought would make him one of the most powerful Elementors, but weirdly enough, at least in my experience of watching the show, Fire Elementor's strength levels and just sort of power is pretty inconsistent. Half the time he's throwing massive fireballs at N-Tech vehicles that are like completely destroying them, and then other times he's throwing tiny little fireballs at Max that barely leave a dent. And I also think that he hardly ever uses his power to its full capability, considering most of the time he's just throwing teeny little fireballs at people. There's never a time where you see him throw like the equivalent of a fire scorcher from Dinosaur King at someone. I just feel like for a Fire Elementor, he doesn't really seem that strong. I mean, he is overall strong. I mean, all of the Elementors are powerful, but for an Ultralink that's in control of fire, I just would have thought that he'd be presented to be stronger than he usually is. But anyway, moving on to the very next episode, we get introduced to Earth Elementor. And Earth Elementor is absolutely the least intelligent of all of the Elementors. He's a brute with very little thinking power that relies basically solely on brute force, which I think is very fitting for an Earth Elementor. I think it's a good personality that fits the character, so, that's good. But like Fire Elementor, Earth Elementor was also working for Dread, and there is also something else I want to mention about Earth Elementor. Earth Elementor is the only type of Elementor that we know for certain there is more than one of. For example, in both the flashback to the Battle of Tachyon and the flashback to the first Battle of Earth, we can see that Earth Elementors as a species seem to be one of the main forms that Makino's Ultralink armies seem to take, which does actually raise an interesting question about all of the other Elementors. Because obviously Earth Elementors are very easy for Ultralinks to become, because we know that Ultralinks link with objects, and all they seemingly have to do to become an Earth Elementor is link with a rock. But when it comes to stuff like fire, obviously, as well as water and air, which we'll obviously get onto in a second, those aren't really physical objects. And out of all the Ultralinks we've never seen one linked to something that isn't physical. So it does make you think as to how Ultralinks like Fire Elementor can actually exist, but regardless, we've gone on a bit of a tangent there. But to quickly elaborate on that point, and I'm really surprised that I didn't mention this in the initial recording, but I remember a while ago on the wiki there was something about a theory that all of the Elementors were actually Omega class Ultralinks. For those of you who don't know, Omega class Ultralinks are the type of Ultralink that Steel is. It's a very rare type of Ultralink, and we only know of a few individuals that actually belong to this classification. The main ones being, of course, Steel, as well as Extroya's Ultralink and Emboro Axteel X376 from Season 2. Now, we can see from the multiple flashbacks that Earth Elementors can seemingly be any type of Ultralink. But I believe the whole theory that the rest of them were supposed to be Omega class came from the fact that obviously the rest of them had linked with elements that weren't physical. Because throughout the show, we've never seen an Ultralink with something that isn't a physical object, like fire, air, and water. So I think the theory of fire, water, and air Elementor being Omega class Ultralinks mainly comes from the fact that we've seen Omega class Ultralinks do stuff that no other Ultralink can do, and behave in ways that no other Ultralink does. Such as the fact that Steel is actually the only Ultralink we know of to have hexagon patterns when he's Ultralinking with something, as opposed to the regular triangular patterns that every other Ultralink, including Makino, has, and the fact that Extroya's Ultralink was somehow able to give him the ability to turn into different animals. So I think that's where the theory came from, that the rest of the Elementors are Omega class, because Omega class are seemingly a bit more unique than the average Ultralink. But there's never actually been anything to confirm that. I just remember seeing that on the wiki at some point, and I believe it's since been removed. Then again, there was actually a toy for Fire Elementor that featured an Omega class Ultralink, and a really weird looking one at that. The toy itself was just an Omega class that was basically completely on fire, but on the box art it seemed as though the only physical bits of it was the center bit and its claws, and the rest of it was just fire. And you could argue that the Ultralink on the box art looks similar to the Season 2 onwards Elementor cores. So, are they Omega class? Honestly, we don't know. But again, we've never really had an explanation as to why Steel is so different, or why we see so few Ultralinks that look like him. So it's not really a bad theory, especially considering we also don't see any other air, water, or fire Elementors, but we see a fuck ton of Earth Elementors. So, are they different? What's so special about them? Why could they bond with stuff that other Ultralinks apparently can't? I don't know, but that's probably something to talk about in another video if I end up doing a video on all the different Ultralinks, or a video on Omega class Ultralinks in particular. I just wanted to mention the whole Omega class Ultralink theory, so let's move on. But Earth Elementor was introduced in the second episode of the show and was back up for Fire Elementor as the two of them were hunting Max. Now, despite his brutish, sort of unintelligent nature, Earth Elementor is pretty powerful. Being able to control Earth, of course, gives him the ability to cause earthquakes and throw giant boulders and manipulate rocks and all that good stuff. And I'd say that Earth Elementor is probably more powerful than Fire Elementor, although he's definitely not the strongest of the Elementors. We've got quite a few to go through yet. And also, on the topic of Earth Elementors, considering this video is supposed to be all Elementors, it would probably be wrong of me not to mention the fact that we did see another individual Earth Elementor in Season 2, Episode 23, Fugitives.
You'll never take me alive, Rhynoc!
Fine by me, mate. The Black Star Council don't care if you're alive or not.
This Earth Elementor was made of the green rocks of an unknown alien planet, and was seen briefly at the start of the episode getting chased by Rhynoc. We also see that when Rhynoc extracts this Ultralink from its Elementor body, or I guess un-Ultralinks it, you could say, we can see that this Earth Elementor was actually originally a stealth Ultralink. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the original Earth Elementor was a stealth Ultralink as well, because as I mentioned earlier, in the flashbacks, we see that seemingly any type of Ultralink can actually become an Earth Elementor. I just thought I should mention that we actually know what type of Ultralink this Elementor is. And apart from Metalak, who we'll obviously talk about later on, this is the only actual character Elementor that we see as both an Ultralink and as an Elementor. But the main thing that's interesting about this Elementor is the fact that it's an Ultralink on a completely random, unknown planet. Because the sort of general conception I have about Makino's Armada is that most, if not all of the Ultralinks are in the Megalink. Although obviously during Season 2, a lot of them did get sent down to Earth to help with the invasion. So it just seems a bit weird that there's a random Elementor on a random planet that isn't even in our solar system where Earth is, which was Makino's next target. Maybe because the other Elementors stayed on Earth to, I guess, prepare for the second invasion, maybe this Elementor was sent to this planet to prepare for Makino's invasion as well. Maybe whatever planet this is was actually the next target on Makino's list. Or maybe this was an Ultralink that escaped Rhinoc and he was trying to recapture it, but it more seems like he was on a contract to get that Ultralink. Or maybe that Elementor was just another deserter. Makino acts like Ultralinks are programmed not to be able to disobey him, which is why he took such an interest in Steel, but then obviously Torbolt ended up betraying the Ultralinks as well. And skipping ahead a little bit, the Elementors were sort of doing that as well, considering they went behind Metal Elementor's back to give the piece of the Turbo Star to Dread. So maybe Ultralinks disobeying and deserting Makino's army is a more common occurrence than it seems. But anyway, there's not really much else I can say about this green alien rock Earth Elementor, so let's move on. Now, moving on to episode 7, Hard Water, which is actually one of my favorite episodes of all Max Steel, we get introduced to Water Elementor.
I think we're about to find out.
Now, in my opinion, Water Elementor was actually done dirty in the later episodes, because in his initial episode, he was actually shown to be really intelligent. Like, in his debut episode, this motherfucker was repairing a Makinian ship with parts from Earth. And yet, in the later episodes, he's sort of just thrown in with Fire and Earth Elementor as just being another dumbass Ultralink. So I don't really like that, but anyway, obviously, Water Elementor is capable of controlling water. Now, not only does this make him pretty powerful by default as he's able to create entire tsunamis, being made of water obviously means that he can't take physical damage, unlike Fire and Earth Elementor. I'd still say that Fire and Earth Elementor are actually stronger on a combat level than Water Elementor, but Water Elementor being unable to be hit sort of makes up for that. But anyway, moving on from Water Elementor, let's talk about episode 13, Elements of Surprise, Part 1. During this episode, we get introduced to the final of the 4 original Elementors, Air Elementor, who was actually foreshadowed in Hard Water as well, because during that episode, there's a training sequence where Max and Steel get the idea to use concrete to fight Water Elementor. And during this training sequence, they're attacked by robots firing fireballs, rocks, and then pressurized water. And Steel says, fire, earth, water, isn't one of them meant to be air? And lo and behold, a couple of episodes later, we meet Air Elementor. Now, Air Elementor is absolutely the most intelligent out of the 4 base Elementors. And of course, being in control of air makes him pretty powerful. Not to mention that, like Water Elementor, he also can't physically be hit. And Air Elementor is actually, I'd say, the only Elementor whose powers are actually consistent. Because despite the fact that he's not shown shown in his individual body very often throughout the series. When he is, he's shown to be incredibly powerful, always generating massive tornadoes and lightning strikes to attack Max and Entech. And hey, he even managed to get a cameo in the live-action movie, and I gotta say, he looks absolutely incredible in that movie. Seeing the animated version of Air Elementor, I couldn't imagine that they could make him so terrifying in live action, but they really did a good job of making him absolutely terrifying, and I'll make sure to make that point when I eventually get round to reviewing the live action movie. Now, Air Elementor actually has quite a different appearance than all of the other Elementors. Whereas all three of the other Elementors thus far have a very similar head shape, and their Ultralink core is usually mistaken for their eye, Air Elementor, as well as being quite a bit bigger than all the other Elementors, has a different shaped head where you can clearly see that his Ultralink core is separate from his eyes. Now, I realized during editing that considering the live action Air Elementor is technically a different Elementor from the one in the animated series, I probably ought to briefly talk about it as its own Elementor as well. After escaping Entech in order to avoid revealing his turbo energy to Miles Dread, or Miles Edwards, as he's randomly called in the live-action movie, Miles realizes that Max 2 is generating turbo energy and sends an Ultralink to capture him. And this Ultralink takes the form of the live-action Air Elementor. Now, there are a few differences between Ultralinks in the TV series and Ultralinks in the live-action movie. Unlike the TV series, where Air Elementors seem to be a rare occurrence as an Ultralink form, in the live-action movie universe, Air Elementors seem to be the most common form for Ultralinks to take. In fact, Air Elementors are the only form that we see evil Ultralinks take in the movie. Now, of course, it's likely that Ultralinks in this live-action universe could probably harness other elements as well, but we only see them harness wind. But once again, it was really cool to see an Elementor in live action, and by God, did it look cool. But Air Elementor is the sort of ringleader of the original 4 Elementors during Season 1. And in his debut episode, he actually lets himself get captured in order to go into Entech and rescue his brothers. He does this by hiding a stasis inhibitor in his Ultralink core, which he uses to break himself and the rest of the Elementors out of their stasis cells. Unfortunately, as I've described previously, the other Elementors aren't as smart, and as they're trying to escape, they accidentally trigger an energy field, which surrounds them with energy and traps them again. Now, at this stage, the other Elementors want Air Elementor to try the stasis inhibitor again, but Air Elementor doesn't want to because the stasis inhibitor, as the name suggests, was designed specifically for the Entech stasis cells, and there's no telling what would happen if it was used on the energy field. Unfortunately, his Elementor brothers are a little less patient than he is, and by zapping Air Elementor's Ultralink core with their own, they force him to activate the stasis inhibitor inside the energy field. The result is that all 4 Elementors merge into one singular body, forming Ultimate Elementor. Now, initially, Air Elementor is shown to have complete control over the Ultimate Elementor body, but after a few moments, the other Elementors emerge and they start to fight each other over control of the body. However, they soon realize that together they're stronger than any one of them were apart, and they decide to use this newfound body to destroy Max Steel. The appearance of Ultimate Elementor is mostly based on Air Elementor, probably because he was the most dominant Ultralink in control of the body. And when he swaps elements, it's just the material of the body that changes, not the appearance of the body itself. Now, whilst the 4 of them are within this combined Ultimate Elementor body, they can not only take turns in controlling it and using their own elemental abilities, but they can also combine their abilities for new attacks, such as Air and Water Elementor combining their abilities to shoot ice at Max, and Air and Fire Elementor combining their abilities to make a Fire Nado. Not to mention that whilst they're within this combined Ultimate Elementor body, it seems as though their control over each of their individual elements has gotten stronger. For example, the powers of Earth Elementor are increased to the point where he can cause entire canyons to cave in. Now, for a few episodes after the Elementors merged, they weren't really much of a threat because they spent most of their time arguing over who would control the body. But eventually, in episode 22, Split Decisions, they finally came to the agreement that their hate for Max Steel was stronger than their hate for each other. And with 4 Elementors working together in one body, they became a force to be reckoned with, as we saw in episode 23, which I do want to briefly bring up. Reason being that Ultimate Elementor actually gets somewhat of a new form in this episode. This episode takes place directly after the Elementors have decided to band together and destroy Max Steel. And we really see in this episode that when they work together, they are a force to be reckoned with. So Max and Entech turn to someone that Elementor would never see coming for help. Toxon. They convinced Toxon to whip up a formula that would neutralize all 4 of Elementor's elemental powers. What the formula actually ends up doing, because Entech are stupid if they think Toxon is trustworthy, is putting Elementor under Toxon's control. And it also gives Ultimate Elementor a cool new purple look.
What gives?
Again, it's not really a new Elementor or a new fusion, but it's something I thought I should include. Ultimate Elementor doesn't appear to be any more powerful in this form, although you could argue that he is more powerful because all 4 Elementors are being forced to obey Toxon altogether, instead of, for instance, one Elementor controlling the body and the others helping. So I guess you could argue that this does actually make Ultimate Elementor more powerful. And I should also point out that Fire Elementor's fire turns purple in this form. That's pretty cool. But moving on to Season 2, we're introduced to the character of Metalak, who is a Megalink. Now, the difference between an Ultralink and a Megalink has never really been fully explained in the show, but there are 3 main differences. The first is that although like an Ultralink, they can take on an Ultralink body and Ultralink with a host, Megalinks are actually built with their own humanoid body. The second is that Megalinks seem to be higher up on the chain of command in Makino's army, as Megalinks are usually seen as pilots or even commanders. And the third is that Megalinks actually have an ability known as annexing, which actually allows a Megalink to forcefully absorb other Ultralinks into their own body to make themselves more powerful. More on that later, but in Season 2, Episode 5, Full Metal Racket, we're introduced to a Megalink named Metalak. Now, while this is never actually stated, everything we know about Metalak actually points to him being Makino's second in command. He's the only Megalink we know of that actually has a name. And weirdly enough, he's the only Megalink that Makino actually talks to as if he's an equal, rather than being someone under him that he's commanding. And we actually find out later in the series that Metalak was actually responsible for conquering most of the planets that Makino has absorbed, which includes Tachyon, as we actually see Metalak in a flashback to the Battle of Tachyon. And we actually also find out in episode 5, when Metalak is introduced, that Steel was actually a deserter from Metalak's army. So everything points to Metalak being a very high-ranking commander in Makino's army, and most likely his second in command who he trusted more than any other Megalink. Now, in episode 5, Makino gives Metalak the rundown of what's happening on Earth. He tells him about Max Steel and that Ultimate Elementor is currently commanding their forces on Earth, but that he's basically doing a pretty shit job of it. He then sends Metalak to Earth to take over command of their forces from Ultimate Elementor. But before going to Earth to meet with Ultimate Elementor and the rest of the Ultralinks now under his command, he searches Earth for a host to Megalink with, and he finds it in a giant metal statue in Nicaragua. He Megalinks with this statue, and thus is born the 5th and final Elementor of Max Steel, Metal Elementor.
Such power. Max Steel.
Prepare to meet
Metal Elementor!
Now, as both a Megalink and an Elementor in control of a pretty powerful element, Metal Elementor is no joke. He's stronger and more durable than all of the other Elementors put together, and his ability to control metal gives him some pretty powerful powers, such as being able to create metal constructs and reconfigure his own body in any way he wants, and actually being able to control metal objects. Metal Elementor's appearance is also pretty unique and pretty cool. He's mainly composed of regularly coloured metal with some gold spines, claws, and feet, and his Ultralink core is in a different shape to all of the other Elementors. Now, moving on to episode 8, Ultralink Hunter, Metal Elementor begins to grow suspicious of Ultimate Elementor. He begins to suspect that during the time that Ultimate Elementor was stationed on Earth whilst all the other Ultralinks and Makino were away, his loyalties to Makino have begun to fade. And so he gives Ultimate Elementor an impossible task just to give him an excuse to annex him at the end of the episode. Now, this impossible mission is to bring Max Steel to Metal Elementor within the next 24 hours. Now, funnily enough, Ultimate Elementor actually half completes this assignment, as he manages to bring both Steel and Vengon to Metal Elementor. But after Max helps Steel and Vengon escape, Metal Elementor still sees this as a failure for Ultimate Elementor. Despite the fact that Metal Elementor set Ultimate Elementor up to fail, he still uses it as an opportunity to absorb him. And although Ultimate Elementor initially tries to resist, he finds himself no match for the Megalink, and all 4 Elementors are absorbed into Metal Elementor, leading to the creation of Mega Metal Elementor.
Earth, water, fire, air, and metal. We are Mega Elementor!
Now, I did also forget to mention that Ultimate Elementor had a few little design changes for Season 2. He gained smaller teeth in between all of his big teeth, and instead of glowing red orbs as his Ultralink cores, you could actually see that the Ultralink cores were actually Ultralinks. Now, Mega Metal Elementor looks insane. It genuinely looks akin to something you'd see in Five Nights at Freddy's 4 with the Nightmare animatronics. Now, unlike with Ultimate Elementor, Mega Metal Elementor exercises complete control over all of the other 4 Elementors. He makes use of their abilities, and he decides when they're allowed to take control of the body. In fact, in a later episode of Season 2, Fire Elementor even describes being able to control the body as being let out to play. And we actually see in Season 2, Episode 11, Hot Zone, that Metal Elementor can actually separate himself and all of the other Elementors at any time. It was established in Season 1 during the episode Split Decisions that the other Elementors can only split up once, by using one of Vengon's Ultralink Hunter devices to separate them from the Ultimate Elementor form. But apparently being absorbed by a Megalink means that the Megalink in question can separate them back into their individual forms at any time you want. Now, that's actually it for Season 2, but moving on to Season 3, the Elementors started to get a little bit creative. Now, at the end of Season 2, during the final battle with Makino, Max actually shoots Mega Metal Elementor with the Turbo Star. And apparently, the Turbo Star is so powerful that it actually separates them into their individual Elementor forms again, which is why in Season 3, they're all individual and not combined anymore. Now, as much as I love Season 3, I think it's at this point the writers started getting a little bit lazy, in that they started forgetting the established lore that had been introduced in the past of the show just to introduce some cool new shit. As in Part 1 of The Wrath of Makino, we actually get 2 new Elementor fusions. The first of these new fusions is a fusion between Fire and Water Elementor.
Perhaps a different strategy is in order.
Yes, I like the way you think.
And as cool as this fusion looks, I do also think it's a bit of a lazy design, considering it's literally just 1/2 Fire Elementor and 1/2 Water Elementor. However, the other fusion is a little bit better, because the other one is a fusion between Wind and Earth Elementor.
This doubles our odds of success.
Let's end this battle, that we may claim our prize!
And this fusion actually looks pretty cool because you can genuinely see that it is a mixture of Earth Elementor and Air Elementor. Now, the reason I made the point about the writers being lazy just for the purpose of introducing cool new shit is because it was established in Season 1 that Elementors combining together is not normal. It is heavily enforced in Season 1 when Ultimate Elementor becomes a thing that it was an accident and not something that Elementors can normally do. Not to mention, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, that they can't just separate at will unless they're Mega-linked. So them just being able to fuse together and separate at will in Season 3... yeah, I'm not really sure I like that. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's cool that we got some new Elementor fusions, I just don't really think it actually makes sense given what we've been told previously. I mean, I guess you could suggest that maybe it's just that 2 Elementors can fuse and unfuse naturally and 4 can't, but I don't know, it just feels a little inconsistent. Now that's actually it for the Elementors and the fusions in the glory days of Max Steel, but funnily enough, one of the only things that the Team Turbo era of Seasons 4 and 5 did well is that it actually introduced 4 new Elementor fusions. And the first of these actually debuted in the first film of Season 4, Team Turbo. During the final battle against Toxon, Extroyer, and all of the Elementors, Fire, Air, and Earth Elementor decide to combine together for the first triple fusion Elementor of the series, Firestorm Elementor.
Let us show her what it truly means to take the world by storm! Firestorm!
Now, I gotta be honest with you guys, considering how low quality the Team Turbo era is most of the time, I was really impressed that they decided to model an entirely new Elementor fusion. Like, that really doesn't seem like something that they would do in that era of Max Steel, considering that they were under time pressures and budget pressures and they had to push out shit like Season 5. But they did, and Firestorm Elementor actually looks pretty decent. If I'm being honest, it's not the most creative design, it's basically just Earth Elementor with a big spike hand and a bit of fire, but, you know, I appreciate them for trying. It's a hell of a lot better than what they did for the other fusions, and speaking of the other fusions, let's move on and talk about them. Now, after being absent for the second movie of Season 4 and the first movie of Season 5, the Elementors made their somewhat triumphant return in the final movie of Season 5. And during this movie, they were enhanced with Terror Energy from Terrorax, and it gave them the ability to fuse once more. Now, in this movie, we had 3 new fusions, 2 of which were between 2 of the Elementors, and then the final one was between all of them. And the first of these was a fusion between Water and Earth Elementor. Now, this fusion is probably the laziest and the worst looking fusion out of any of the fusions. And I get that that's probably because they were under intense time and budget pressures, so they couldn't really do as good a job as they did in the glory days. But, you know, it's just Water Elementor with a couple of rocks all over his body, really. However, the second fusion is actually quite a bit cooler, because this was a fusion between Fire and Metal Elementor. And I gotta be honest, I really like this fusion. The black metal parts look really, really cool. And I like it how the majority of Metal Elementor's body is sort of like a mix between fire and metal. It's like orange glowing molten metal, but it's still metal. So yeah, I actually really like Fire Metal Elementor. Now, the final Elementor fusion is actually a little bit weird, because nearing the end of the battle between Team Turbo and the Elementors, Metal Elementor decides to absorb all of the other Elementors into himself. And you would have thought that that would just lead to the return of Mega Metal Elementor. But it doesn't. Instead, it apparently leads to something the community has apparently called Super Metal Elementor.
Never have we been this elemental! And never have you been so doomed!
Now, I don't really know how this makes any sense at all, because we have literally seen Metal Elementor absorb all of the other Elementors into him before, and we know what that leads to. It leads to Mega Metal Elementor. So why is it that when Metal Elementor absorbs all of the other Elementors here, even though all of the other Elementors have nothing to do with metal, it just leads to a bigger, more powerful Metal Elementor? And he doesn't even have 5 Ultralink cores in his head like he did when he was Mega Metal Elementor. Also, that's another thing that I forgot to mention that I don't like about the Seasons 4 and 5 Elementor Fusions, is that they don't have multiple Ultralink cores in their heads. But regardless, Super Metal Elementor for some reason is just Metal Elementor, but like 3 times as big, and yeah, that's it, basically. Now, those are all of the Elementors and the Fusions in the show, but as you guys know with these videos, there are sometimes other versions of these villains as toys. And I always like to go over them in these videos, so let's talk about them. Now, the first of these is Night Air Elementor. This was a special rare version of another toy of Air Elementor, where Air Elementor was actually purple. Which, now that I think about it, could bear some resemblance to the version of Elementor that was controlled by Toxon, where he turned all purple. But anyway, this toy was pretty cool. It's pretty cool that they just did like a alternate version of Air Elementor that was rarer. And it's a shame that it was so rare, because considering how rare most Max Steel toys are nowadays, you know, looking for this one would probably be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Now, the second toy is actually something called Lava Elementor. Now, this is pretty interesting, because you would have thought at first that Lava Elementor would be a fusion between Fire Elementor and Earth Elementor. But this toy appears to be an individual Elementor, and from the box art, it actually looks really different than anything that was in the series, as Lava Elementor has parts of his body that are made of this really dark blue rock, and he genuinely looks like a completely new Elementor, so that's pretty cool. And I guess in fairness, it would be possible for a Lava Elementor to exist, because, you know, Ultralinks can Ultralink with anything, and lava is molten rock. It's different enough from fire and earth that it could be its own Elementor. So yeah, that's a pretty interesting thing. Moving on from Lava Elementor, we have Shore Blast Metal Elementor, who is basically Metal Elementor, but with a lot more gold to him. His entire face and most of his hands are completely golden, and his chest piece also separates to reveal some red bits underneath. Honestly, I have no idea why, but he sort of looks a bit like a pirate with all of that gold on him.
As the saying goes, that's for us to know.
Oh my god, what have they done to Metal Elementor's voice? He sounds like a fucking pirate! Arr, I be Metal Elementor! I was once a supreme Megalink commander in Lord Mackino's army, but now I don't know what the fuck the writers have done to me. But anyway, there's not really much else to say about this one, so moving on, we have Hydro Flame Elementor, and this is a bit of a weird one, because this appears to be a fusion between regular Water Elementor and Ultimate Elementor, which doesn't make any sense, because just from a first glance it seems to be a mixture between Fire and Water Elementor, and although I think the middle bit is supposed to be steam, from the looks of it you could throw Air Elementor in there as well. But it has 2 different heads that you can press a button and they flip round. One of them is Water Elementor and the other is Ultimate Elementor, so that doesn't really make any sense. But the really cool thing about this one is that it's one that I actually own. It's in the background there. It's been in the background for a couple of months now. I found it on eBay for like 20 quid and it's actually still in the box. It's never been opened. And considering how rare the more unique Max Steel toys are nowadays, that is probably the pride of my collection. I'll probably do a video at some point showing you guys all of those figures and just showcasing all of the ones I've collected. Now, the final Elementor toy that we're going to be talking about in this video is actually Marine Rock Elementor. Now, this is another fusion that we saw in the show in Season 5, as this is a fusion between Water and Earth Elementor. But I believe this toy actually predates the release of Turbo Warriors, so this version of the fusion actually came first. And I gotta be honest, I'm actually really glad that they went with the version that's actually in Turbo Warriors rather than trying to recreate this version. Because regardless of how lazy the other version looks in Turbo Warriors, this version looks ridiculous. As you can see from the image I've brought up right now, it looks hideous. It looks like something you'd see in Aquaman. It's got a bunch of vomit green rocks all over it and it just looks awful. But yeah, everyone, that is all of the Elementors in Max Steel, as well as a couple of toy variants that were a little bit different. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and go join both the casual Discord if you want to be notified whenever I upload videos or go live, and the Max Steel unofficial Discord if you want to hang around with other Max Steel fans. Again, thanks a lot for watching, everyone, and I will see you on another video or stream very, very soon. Goodbye, everyone.